In this video, we're going to talk about recruitment options and the new city tax laws. So if you open up your holotape and go into options, gameplay options, and then go down to recruitment, you're going to see some new settings. And this list will be expanded on, but for now we've got 4 options which dramatically change the way things work. So with beacon recruitment off, which it's obviously on by default, but if you turn it off, it will change the way you play the game. Rather than have settlers who don't have Pip-Boys or any way to find your radio signal just showing up at random, instead you'll need to go out into the world and actually recruit new people to live and work at your settlements. And there are 2 ways that you can do so immediately, and one of them is a DLC, another is a mod, and in the future I will be adding recruitable settlers into some settlements so that you can play with this option without having to have anything else. So with the Automatron DLC, after you get that quest started and you found Ada, there will be random robot attacks happening all over the Commonwealth, and occasionally they will have settlers that are kind of in peril, and you can rescue them and then send those settlers to your settlement. And then another way you can gain access to settlers is with the mod Recruitable Settlers, which deposits unique NPCs all over the Commonwealth for you to find, recruit, and send to your settlements. So this is a very unique option for gameplay that allows you to play with settlers, but also make sure you get a chance to meet each of them before they show up at your settlement randomly, which is kind of immersion breaking. So the next option, city plan limit. Each of the city plans, so keep in mind this only happens if you're using the automated building, otherwise it won't affect you negatively in any way. But the city plan limit is designed so that the settler count matches what we thought would make sense for each settlement in that plan. So if we planned out for there to be eventually 15 jobs in a settlement, then the max number of settlers that will show up would be 15 in that particular settlement. So it'll keep those settlements from becoming overcrowded. Now, if you're using the automated building and you want to just keep getting more settlers, you can turn this off, and settlers will continue to come, assuming you have enough charisma, unless you turn on this option. So for those of you who hate charisma builds, or for those of you who want to kind of have an unlimited settler build, you can turn on this ignore charisma, and your charisma will no longer be used when determining if you should get new settlers. So the way settlers work in vanilla, in the base game, is that the most you can have in any settlement is 10 plus your charisma. So if you had a charisma score of 1, you would stop getting settlers at 11, which would prevent your cities from upgrading if they had more than 11 plots planned in them, which a lot of them do. So you're going to want to turn this option on if you're playing with a low charisma build and you're using the automated cities. So this option, some of you will turn it on. Others who like the local leader perk and end up getting charisma anyway, you can leave it off. But it might be fun to turn on anyway, just so that you can continue to grow those cities to enormous populations. And then finally, we have max unemployed. This is the actual thing that... Let me start over. This is the actual setting that prevents you from ending up with unlimited settlers. So you have to have jobs available for additional settlers to show up. So by default, the number is 2. That means that if 2 settlers are recruited and they have nothing to do, you'll stop getting new settlers. But you can increase this number or lower it so that less people just standing around will be waiting for you when you come back to those settlements. And if you want to set it to 0, you can even prevent new settlers at all from being recruited after you've run out of placed jobs. Now, I will warn that if you have the unemployed set to 0, it can prevent city plans from continuing to work. So I would leave this on 1 or higher if you're using any automated cities. But if you're a manual builder and you want to have control over the number of settlers that show up without having to run around turning beacons on and off, the max unemployed is the control you're going to want to tweak. All right, now head back in your holotape to the tax laws section, which is on the main screen, and that's because this is a major gameplay control. I had moved it to the options in the last patch before 3.0, but decided to move it back out because I wanted this to be kind of a gameplay element. Now, before I go into this, if you're not interested in micromanaging your city's laws and having big changes on the way things happen based on settings you configure, I would stop this video. You don't need to watch the rest of this. By default, all the tax laws are set up exactly as they are in some settlements before the 3.0 patch. So basically you would just get caps periodically based on the number and level of plots you had, and that hasn't changed at all. This is for people who really like to get into city management simulators and have effects on the way things work based on their laws in the game. So If you don't like the taxes at all and you don't want to be collecting free caps, you can go into tax laws and just turn the whole system off. But for those of you interested in the nitty gritty, we're going to go into how some of this works. So first off, I'm going to say two things. One is that this system is in its infancy. This is something I'm going to continue to enhance on, but I want to get more feedback from those of you who are really into this type of gameplay. So if you're really into city simulators, you love tweaking laws and having it have wide sweeping effects, head to the simsettlements.com forums and start making posts in the suggestions forum, and I will continue to read through those and we can come up with great things to change this system. So this is kind of a start. So the tweaks are pretty minor, just because I don't want to break the game. I don't want to have a set of tax laws that just make the game too easy, or a set of them that just make it way too difficult and unplayable. So I want to find a happy medium and make sure that we've got a good balanced system going on. The second thing I'm going to say is that right now the laws are applied globally, but in a patch the taxes will be controllable on the local level. That is absolutely coming, because I think that's really important to this system. So let's talk about how they all work. So every single plot type except for martial can be controlled with taxes, and the reason that martial are excluded is because martial I consider kind of a city service. These kind of represent one of the only government functions in some settlements right now, and that will change. City service buildings are absolutely going to be a part of the patches that come down the line for Rise of the Commonwealth, because I want you to feel like more of a governmental leader figure and not the builder. So city services are going to become a more important part of sim settlements. Right now they represent martial, so those can't be taxed, because it wouldn't make any sense for you to be taxing your own service buildings. So the other 5 plots are all covered here. Before this patch, recreational wasn't covered. It is now covered. And each of these has a group of shared effects when you change them, and a unique effect for each of the different plot types. So if we pop into one of these just so you can see the different options, it's the same options that were there before this patch, and that's because I want to make sure that the changes matter. So I may add more steps in between, but I'm never going to get it down as small as SimCity of having individual percentages, and the reason is because the effects would be too hard to notice. So in a game like SimCity, you're dealing with a huge simulation. You're dealing with millions of simoleons, you're dealing with hundreds of thousands of citizens, so having a tiny change, a percentage change, matters. But having a percent change when you're dealing with 20 settlers and a few hundred caps, it doesn't make a lot of sense to have that micro level of changes. So instead we're going to do jumps. So I'll most likely add more jumps in between these, but for now I stuck with the ones that were shipped with the initial launch of Sim Settlements. So you have 2 options to lower taxes and 1 option to increase them. And the lowering the taxes has the following effects. 1, it has a increase to happiness, and each of these the effects are more pronounced if you go to no tax versus a half tax. So you will increase happiness, you will increase build speed if you're on realistic build times, you will increase the upgrade times. You will decrease the upgrade time, so the time between upgrades will be reduced. And you will also decrease defense spending. So that means you will have defense penalties to not only your settlement, but also to your martial plots in general. So there's always going to be a balance. It's going to be kind of a risk-reward system built into the taxes. And like I said, it's very infant right now. There's not a ton of changes. They're very, very minor to just kind of get this system testing the waters and make sure that we get it into a good spot without breaking the game. Now, if you double the taxes, it does the opposite. So it slows down build times, it increases the time between upgrades, reduces happiness, and actually increases defense spending so that you get bonuses to your martial plots and your settlement defense. So those are the universal settings. So each of those are affected if you change any of these tax rates. Now, each of them also has an individual change. If you increase agricultural's tax rate, you will reduce the amount of food they can create. Whereas if you decrease their taxes, you will increase the food your agricultural plots produce. With commercial and recreational, this is one of the few that's shared between 2. You increase or decrease the likelihood of visitors showing up in your settlement, and visitors will actually contribute more resources. So I haven't gone into the visitor system in this video series yet, but the visitors, the more of them that are showing up in your settlements, the more income that's generated for your settlement. So the commercial and recreational taxes will, if they're increased, will discourage new visitors from showing up, whereas if they're reduced, they'll encourage more tourism in that regard. And then industrial will increase the amount of scrap that's generated in your settlement if you lower the taxes, and decrease it if you increase the taxes. And then finally, residential will change the recruitment rate. So the higher your residential taxes, the less likely people are to move in, and the lower your taxes, the more likely settlers are to move in. So this is the core of the tax system right now. It's going to be dramatically changed over time, but this is just the start, and I want to get feedback before I start tweaking this too much. So if you're into city management, if you're into micromanaging the laws and seeing how they affect things, please head to the suggestion forums and throw out your thoughts on the current system and any thoughts you have on improving it. All right, guys, that covers some of the controls you have. In the next video, we're going to go over the new maintenance system, which is an optional system for those players who really like to get involved in their settlements and want to see more balance in the game.